So I'm going to make it easy in the beginning. I'm going to allow each of you to introduce yourselves and answer this first question. So I'll introduce myself real quick. So Larry Whiteside Jr., former CISO, recovering CISO. I don't know how you want to say it. I've done it a lot of times. I see a lot of friends in the room, more than I like to count. But started a new company. I won't go into what that is, but if you want to talk about it, let me know. So the first question, as you introduce yourselves, drum roll, please. All right. When you think about your careers and the changes that have happened over time, how have you seen the non-human identity landscape evolve over that time?
I'll go first. I think amongst the panelists, I have the least amount of experience. So I'll start with that. But I've been with Splunk. I spent about 5 years there working on the SIM product. And then I've now shifted over to a startup called P0 Security. So what I've seen is there's been a massive sprawl in the number of non-human identities as people have gone to the cloud. So many more things, many more machines, many more CI/CD pipelines taking on credentials, doing work. So just the proliferation of the number of NHIs has increased dramatically. And the one difference that I've seen is the CISOs and security leaders are now recognizing the importance of this, right? So it used to be very marginal. They would sort of treat it as a non-threat, tend to focus on human identities only. And that has dramatically shifted in the last couple of years. I think a lot of credit goes to the NHI team as well for bubbling up the message, but it's really clear the leaders are listening and they're now giving policy-driven governance on NHIs as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Harnit. Art Poghosyan here. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Britive. Britive is a cloud privileged access management solution. My background, I'm an identity guy since early 2000s. So I've seen the space evolve from LDAP directories to what it is now. Would echo to what Harnit said, tremendous changes and evolution when it comes to non-human, as we call it now, the non-human identity. We used to call them just service accounts and put the login and password in a spreadsheet, which was a bad idea, and replaced it with vaults. Okay, worked for some time and auditors were happy. But the whole game's changed tremendously with automation. Then it was more about manual processes. Now it's all about automation. The more automation, the more access, the more autonomous things that need access and privileges. I'm not even going to start on the AI topic yet. So
No, not today.
But yeah, tremendous changes. We have to deal with it, though. It's a huge risk and threat landscape that we have to protect against. Right? Hopefully, we'll cover more as we go. But off to you.
I always have to do it at the wrong time. It's the same as eating when people ask me questions. It's like after I eat, oh no. I'm Olivia Phillips. I am the BISO. BISO stands for Business Information Security Officer. We're like a CISO, but better looking. Sorry, CISO. And we're all about the business. When it comes to the landscape, a lot has changed in the last 5 to 10 years and how we look at things. But I think it's also the things that we didn't look for, where service accounts, we didn't track them like the way we should have. We didn't have the right policies in place or procedures in place stating this must be done. It was, oh, someone left? Okay, bye. And no one tracked that. No one deleted the account. And then all of a sudden, someone was able to access it externally because someone said they worked there. So I think the threat keeps on changing. And yes, AI, I'm going to say it. Sorry. AI. I think I met the quota. Has made a big impact on, I think, non-human identity. I think it's going to increase the risk for any organization.
So I'm going to admit a little flaw here. So as a CISO, I can honestly say when I first heard about non-human identity, I was like, why? Like, why are we separating out identity and segmenting identity? And then I began having more conversations, right? Because sometimes as a CISO, we think we know, and then we realize we're at the 5,000-foot level sitting up in the clouds, and we really don't. So what are some of the misconceptions of non-human identity that you're hearing from both executives and other practitioners in the market? Ladies first this time.
I think the biggest thing for me when it comes to our executives, it's they think they know. They, hey, I know what this is, and they just looked it up on Google. because the internet's always right. And they always look at that first statement, and they don't actually do that deep dive because they don't have the time. But then when they come to me, explain to me what this means. And then you have to take something that's technical and explain it to like a 5-year-old, which is not always easy. And I think that's probably the biggest thing for me.
I think one thing that really kind of stands out for me is how practitioners, and not everybody, but generally try to solve the new modern problems with NHIs with traditional methods and approaches. It's challenging because they weren't built for the new reality of these things. So my recommendation is always to reevaluate what you have, not saying to throw away everything that you have, but reevaluate and really apply the requirements for the modern challenges or the modern situations that you're trying to solve, and not assume that what worked 20 years ago is going to work today.
That's perfect. I'll echo those both statements. I think one is thinking that traditional tooling is going to go solve it for you. And that's a misconception that a lot of the CISOs have. Second is just the sprawl. They think they have it covered. We've seen it across multiple customers that they'll give us a number on the number of identities that they have. We'll run the assessment for them, and it'll be 30% less, or rather, they came in at 30% less than the actual number. So they're a lot more than what they've originally envisioned that they want to go keep track of. And third is they just don't seem to understand, in a lot of cases, how risky the identities are. They assume it's for a very low risk, it's an infrastructure component. It turns out to be a very high risk access point, right? So people tend to go in and not realize that you can actually use your Terraform or CI/CD credentials to go in, get admin access to a whole bunch of things that you didn't think you would. You would always pinpoint that to human access, never to the NHIs. So they would constantly downplay the urgency behind it. And so those, when you're able to show them the amount of risk they carry and the amount that they're overlooking for the number of accounts they actually have, then it becomes like a serious threat for them.
So you mentioned the R word, so I'm going to go there. So from a risk management perspective, right, CISOs are always talking about risk, and they're trying to tie risk to the activities that they're doing. So when you CISOs, if you were talking to a CISO today and you were going to try and, I don't want to say quantify the risk, but you were going to try and help a CISO understand the risk associated with this and the threats tied to that, what would you tell them?
I would put a number associated with that risk and tell them, hey, here's your problem. This is what the potential cost of this risk is. And this is what you're causing the company. So you're potentially losing $3 million. I've seen that successful with other things when it comes to risk. When there's a number behind it, you get their attention.
Right. Yeah, I'll agree with that.
Yeah, my answer to that would be absolutely risk and impact have to be part of the equation, right? It's impossible to mitigate every risk, and it's not worth it either. You really have to look at it from the business lens to understand what is going to be the most negative impact of not mitigating a certain risk. And yes, if it is a critical infrastructure where it's fully automated and a lot of the access is driven from infrastructure as code standpoint, that's probably worth mitigating and eliminating as much risk as possible. But it's not the same answer for every other environment, right?
Yeah, for me, we try and tend to give concrete examples to go with the business impact. So it's, hey, you know what happened with Circle CI? Their credentials got used and people's GitHub, the entire code base was exposed. So Uber had the same challenge, right? So you give concrete examples and say, this is something that could potentially happen. This is the amount of business impact. Then it registers a little bit more because they're able to see that it actually can happen. It's not like a trivial risk or sort of those 1% chances. It's actually happened to companies and the impact has been massive.
So when I think about this and now looking at it through a different lens, identities is very fractured, right? So from a human identity standpoint, we've got data storage, right? We've got a place where all of our human identities live. And they tend to stay kind of static, right? So if you've got 10,000 employees, you may have a few more than 10,000 human identity accounts. When you think about the NHI world, it's typically your employee count to a factor of X and growing. So what should companies do? How do they get life cycle around that when there's no identity store for them to go to that I know of that they can go to? What is the first step that they should start taking to try and get a hold of this new risk that everybody's identifying?
All right. So I think that's why we're here, right? You look at a bunch of tables around, you want to get to automation, right? Figure out what tool can you leverage to get the entire inventory of what you have, what your landscape is looking like. Then you go tackle it down based on the sensitivity of the resources that it can touch, a certain set of service accounts, and the amount of overall overprivileged access do they have. And slowly go and prioritize it based on that. Like, it's always automation and discovery as much as possible. Just begin, get the understanding of the landscape, and then go prioritize.
Yeah, I really like your answer, mate. And one thing that I love add to that is this is maybe a little bit counterintuitive coming from a founder of a product, but don't start with a product. Don't start with a tool. Start with the end state you want in the environment. Start with a path or a roadmap to that end state, and the technology and other pieces will fit in that picture. A lot of times I see teams, companies start with a product thinking that's where it will end, solves every problem. I've never seen that work. It's more of how they get to that end state. I think this one, again, happens to be very tricky. You're dealing with a lot of, I'm referring to the non-human access problem. It's very tricky because it's not as consistent with the human identity management that we've learned over the past 2 decades or so how to do. You have to really kind of look at it as its own unique thing. And that's why it's so important to really start with an end state in mind and work towards that.
I'm just going to add on to what you both said. I think the other thing is continuous monitoring, tracking that, and communication. I mean, I can't say that enough. If your HR and leadership are not talking to each other and they're very siloed, you're going to keep on running into issues.
Okay, so I'm going to pick on you a little bit. So you said over the last 20 years, what we've understood about identity and how we've for the humans and how we've been able to fix that. Is it fixed? Right? So, and I say that a little tongue in cheek because if we have not gotten human identity right in the 3 decades plus that I've been in the industry, how do you trust that we're going to get non-human identity right faster? That's growing exponentially faster than human identities are. And there's no right answer to this, just so you know.
Thanks, Larry. Appreciate that question. But yeah, you and I know each other for many years from the Optive days and whatnot. And you know how long this industry, the IAM industry has come, yet even haven't told the whole human identity side of it. And I agree with that. There's a lot, even that environment is changing, right? But I think we just don't have a choice to deal with the non-humans. You can't just put them aside and say, let's come to this next year. It's one of those things that have become so highly critical that needs to be dealt with. You can't perfect the human identity then to deal with this. In fact, I believe there's a lot that has been learned from the human identity management journey that applies here. Like how do we learn to govern the identity management identities and identity management processes? How we do privileged access, for example, how differentiate between something that's not as critical from something that's very critical. We can apply the same principles and concepts, but we have to deal with it like today. I don't think it's going to wait till tomorrow.
Anybody else?
I will say one thing: social engineering does not apply. So that's a big factor, right? At least you cut off one vector. I think other than that, I completely agree with Art. Like there are always going to be gaps. You have to start somewhere and you go look at the highest risk and go work your way downwards from there. And then beyond that, hey, at least trust until AI comes into the picture. Social engineering is at least siloed out for NHIs.
When we think about non-human identities from a CISO perspective again, right, one of the things that I always used to deal with was compliance, right? And controls from those compliance frameworks and then the frameworks of NIST or whatever that I chose to try and implement across my organization. When you think about NHI, at what point do you think that NHI is going to become a component of framework that organizations are going to have to deal with, either from a regulatory standpoint or from the frameworks that we are all trying to drive towards to meet our regulatory demands?
I'll take that. I think it's already started. It's just not fully published yet. They are aware that it is a problem and they're starting to write it up, but it's like, okay, we started with NIST 800-53. All right. Now we're at NIST 171, and they're already starting to work on the new one that's coming out. And, and I'll say PCI. That's always a big thing for financials. It's, first it was PCI 3.0. And then if you went to PCI 4.0, it changed the entire way you look at the payment industry. And it's caused a lot of organizations to be like, wait, what? We have to do this now? Like, when did this come into effect? I think that's where we're going to be, where all of a sudden it's going to be like, now we have to change. And we have 1 minute.
We got 1 minute. So close. All right. So last question, and you get 10 seconds each. If you are leaving one thing for the audience to take away, anybody who's watching this now or gets to watch this later, as it relates to non-human identities, what's the thing you want them to take away from a practitioner's perspective?
Talk about it, communicate it, make everybody aware of the situation. Don't do a silo. Don't keep it to yourself, because all you're doing is hurting yourself and the organization.
I'd add to what Olivia said, start building partnerships and stakeholder groups to help you with this. It's going to be massive.
Bring DevOps on board. That's a big thing. Try to meet them where they're at. Don't try and fight with them. It's never going to work.
Coming from the Splunk guy.
Listen, I'm going to leave it right there. Listen, I want to thank each of you for coming out and taking time today to share with this audience. I want to thank all of you for attending and listening to this panel. And thank you. Intro.